This month marks 2 years since shots rang through a Northeast Lincoln neighborhood. On November 29, 2015, Lincoln police and a wanted man exchanged gunfire.
For the first time tonight, two of the officers involved are publicly sharing their story, not only of the shooting, but of their recovery. 10:11 now, Shelby Fenster joins us with part one of our special report, Shots Fired, Lives Changed.
It all started as a routine call for a vehicle with stolen plates. But when it came back, the suspect, Zach Grigsby, had a warrant for his arrest and refused to be taken into custody. Things took a turn for the worse.
1742, where you at? 1640, can you be en route? 1553 and the rest are at 2931 North 73rd. Sounds like we got somebody fighting. Shots fired, get out of that!
Suspect Zach Grigsby, Sergeant Brad Junker, and Officer Angela Sands were already in a tangled web on the ground in a fight for their lives.
He was much bigger, much stronger than both of us, so he was able to retrieve the handgun out of his waistband or his pocket on his right side. And as we're pulling his arms like this, he pulls the gun up here, which my head's right here. So the first shot, so the gun comes to here. And I pull my head back, and that's where the first shot goes off.
That first shot hit another responding officer in the arm, and as the bullet flew past Officer Sands, it deafened, blinded, and burned her.
A flood of emotions and feelings and thoughts when you think you've just been shot in the face. I thought, well, I'm gonna die. Even if you're gonna die, you gotta keep going, because now others' lives are at risk. Sergeant Junker is a father. That was one of the thoughts I had, is I can't let a 7-year-old lose his father tonight.
Received on the last. I'm going to stay off the radio until you tell me further. Medical code 3. Officers down. Officers down. Two been hit. One party down. Okay. Just one person down right now? Yeah, get more people here. I need medical. I got off hit.
Officer Sands and Sergeant Brad Junker kept going, fighting to get the gun as Grigsby continued to fire.
He was able to fire the gun. He was able to rack the slide. He was able to fire again. Why can't I get this gun out of this guy's hand?
Tests would show Grigsby was high on meth, his superhuman strength easily overpowering two well-trained officers.
I knew I didn't want to kill anyone that day. I knew I didn't want to kill a human being, but I got to the point where I felt like Sergeant Junker's going to die. There's innocent people coming out of their homes that are going to die.
We got parties in the house. I'm not sure what's going on up here, but we definitely have one party that's down, more than likely 3-5. Where's he? One of ours or one of theirs? Theirs.
With both of Sergeant Junker's hands fighting Grigsby, Officer Sands managed to grab her gun and shoot, severing Grigsby's spine.
I can tell by his body and his the noises he's making and the movements that he's been shot. So I'm thinking that we're done. And that, little did I know, it was about to get much worse.
Zach reached over to grab Angela, and at that time his jacket kind of came open and he had a white t-shirt on. And so that's where I focused my point of fire.
I'm feeling rounds flying past me, which is Junker shooting.
But again, that superhuman meth-fueled strength. Even as Officer Junker shoots Grigsby in the chest, Grigsby holds on to Officer Sands. Then Grigsby fires his gun, point blank, at her heart. Her life saved by a bulletproof vest.
It goes into the microphone right here. My face is tucked down. That explodes into my face, breaks two of my teeth.
Her life saved by her bulletproof vest, and soon, Sergeant Junker.
My only option left to shoot is at the top of Zach's head. A final shot is fired from me. At that point, I see him release his arms. Angela kind of rolls out of his grasp.
Out of his grasp, and soon out of harm's way.
I stood up, but I immediately collapsed. I couldn't breathe and my chest hurt. So as I collapsed, I just grabbed the gun out of his hand, and then I just had to crawl to Junker because I couldn't walk.
One of the things that I really remember from that night was Angela crawling towards me to get around a car. I could hear the sound of her metal firearm dragging across the concrete and the sound of her pushing Zach's gun. That's just kind of burned in my mind.
Officer Sands and Sergeant Junker say during the shooting, time slowed down. Well, they could spend hours going through all of their thoughts. The entire physical struggle lasted a mere minute. Coming up tonight at 10 in part 2 of our special report, we hear what they've had to overcome since that night.
Now, the third officer involved who was shot in the arm that night was medically retired from the Lincoln Police Department. Broken, a shell of a human. That's how Lincoln police officer Angela Sands describes herself after she was shot in the chest in an officer-involved shooting 2 years ago.
Since then, Officer Sands and Sergeant Brad Junker have worked to piece together a new normal. 10/11 Now's Shelby Fenster shares their journey to recovery in part 2 of our special report, Shots Fired, Lives Changed.
Everything that happened right in this area right here. This is the first time I've been out here on the street since it happened.
There was times when just being on this end of town or driving by would cause me so much anxiety. I had to stop or I couldn't finish my shift.
2 years have passed, but the memories are just as clear.
The year following was probably the worst year of my life.
Officer Sands was broken.
While we were both there, it was vastly different for us.
2 weeks after the shooting, and Sergeant Junker was back at work.
What I really wanted was to return to normalcy. And for me, that was coming back to work, going back to the street, being around the people that I work with.
His big blue family, that was his therapy. But Officer Sands' journey to normalcy was much longer.
When I couldn't control my nightmares, I would have a nightmare and I'm basically in a fight for my life every night. It wears you out. So then you don't even want to go to sleep.
Diagnosed with PTSD, Officer Sands worked hard to face her emotions, writing with other officers, turning to therapy and support groups, even switching to a new beat.
So I wouldn't have a constant reminder. I don't have to drive by the intersection every day, walk into that building and be constantly reminded.
But one thing never wavered, her determination to win and get back to the career she loves.
It's common for officers in traumatic events like that to quit. They usually quit within the first 2 years. And so I had that goal in my head, like, I just got to make it 2 years.
She says it took a year until she felt back to herself, her new self. Soon talking about her experience turned to teaching.
When Sergeant Junker approached me and said, hey, let's teach a class with Sergeant Hruza, my first reaction was absolutely not. Like, I got physically ill during the grand jury talking about it.
But Officer Sands says she knew the impact they could have on new recruits. It's something that came much easier to Sergeant Junker, who was a high school teacher before joining the force.
You can watch TV shows, documentaries, but it's vastly different when you talk to somebody face-to-face that's gone through this.
It only took 1 minute on one cold night to forever change Officer Sands, something she says she'll think about every day.
It's just a new life, and that's weird at 36, starting over and getting to know yourself again. That's a weird thing.
And just as their recovery has been different, so is their future. While Sergeant Junker won't think of it every day, there are some things that weigh heavy.
Zach's child. I don't like the fact that what happened is going to cause this child to grow up without a father, because his child would be about the same age as my son.
One day, Sergeant Junker says maybe Zach's son will hear this story and understand.
I just want people to understand that when we take our uniforms off and go to our civilian worlds, that we're human too.
Officer Angela Sands and Sergeant Brad Junker now have an indescribable bond. They're even nicknamed Brangela. Officer Sands now serves as the Lincoln Police Department's public information officer, and Sergeant Junker is now a personnel sergeant. Their offices are just feet away.
Now, Officer Sands credits her survival to the Kevlar vest she was wearing the night of the shooting just last month. She flew to Philadelphia to be accepted into the International Association of Chiefs of Police DuPont Kevlar Survivors Club. She's the first woman to be accepted into the club.